let's turn to the latest reporting that suggests some of the president's defenders are knowingly taking part in a Russian operation to smear Ukraine and to divide the United States. NBC News has now confirmed reporting from the New York Times that U.S. intelligence officials briefed senators in recent weeks that Russia engaged in a years-long campaign to frame Ukraine for its own meddling in the 2016 U.S. election. A United States official tells NBC News the information about the Russian operation was considered classified until Dr. Fiona Hill revealed it in her public testimony at last week's impeachment hearing. But being part of a Putin disinformation campaign is not stopping the president or his defenders from pushing or engaging in the debunked conspiracy theory.
The FBI went in and they told him, get out of here. We're not giving it to you. They gave the server to CrowdStrike or whatever it's called, which is a company owned by a very wealthy Ukrainian. And I still want to see that server. You know, the FBI has never gotten that server. That's a big part of this whole thing. Why did they give it to a Ukrainian company?
Are you sure they did that? Are you sure they gave it to Ukraine?
Well, that's what the word is.
Senator Kennedy, who do you believe was responsible for hacking the DNC and Clinton campaign computers, their emails? Was it Russia or Ukraine?
I don't know, nor do you, nor do any of us. Ms. Hill,
well, I mean, let me just interrupt to say the entire intelligence community says it was Russia.
Right, but it could also be Ukraine. I'm not saying that I know one way or the other. I'm saying that Ms. Hill is entitled to her opinion, but no rebuttal evidence was allowed to be offered.
Rev, I can't stress enough how deep a conspiracy theory that was until it reached the White House. It was a 4chan CrowdStrike thing. CrowdStrike's an American company, by the way. It's not a Ukrainian company. There's no physical server. We can go through this all again, as we've done a million times. That was the president pushing it on Fox and Friends. But again, the second layer of these last 3 years has been the Republican support. The president says something wild, conspiratorial, false, and he has an entire group of senators who come in behind him and support. Senator Kennedy knows better. He knows that's a conspiracy theory, and he's ignoring all the intel agencies when he says that on TV.
It is frightening when you see Senator Kennedy confronted by Chris Wallace saying the entire intelligence community says it was Russia. He says, yeah, but it still can be Ukraine. I mean, in the face of a factual statement, they still want to go to this alternative because they are trying to walk in lockstep with Donald Trump, who has decided that he's going to have an alternative universe that he lives in, and we're all going to have to move over there. Right. And if we don't, there's something wrong with us. I think the thing that is most disturbing is when you have the Congressman Nunes sitting there, and he is the cheerleader, the head of the team that is opposing what the Chairman Schiff is doing in the impeachment hearings. And now we find out that he himself was directly involved in trying to go and see if they could get some dirt on the Bidens. And no one in the Republican Party, no one in the Republican leadership is seeing that is at minimum a conflict of interest. He sat there the whole hearing process, being the spokesperson, the lead on the opposition, and he was involved personally, and we're told probably at taxpayer monies, chasing down this whole attempt to smear Joe Biden and his son. If this is not the epitome of trying to play the public against the truth, I don't know what is.
Rev's talking about the Giuliani associate, Lev Parnas, who made the allegation that Devin Nunes was making contact and meeting with Ukrainian officials to get dirt on Joe Biden. The first cue I got that you wanted to hop in on this, Adrian, was when I saw your fist shaking with rage as Senator Kennedy spoke. Extraordinary.
It's extraordinary, Willie. I mean, we all remember when all of the intelligence agencies came together in a very rare statement several months before the election in 2016, declaring that Russia is indisputably meddling in the 2016 election. As a former Clinton aide, I saw this firsthand. I witnessed it firsthand. And the fact that you have all of these Republicans now who are going against what our intelligence agencies said and saying, oh, maybe it's Ukraine. I mean, Willie, there are days that I wake up and feel like I'm living in an alternative universe, and this is one of those days.
And you know, Mike, All you have to do is listen to Dr. Fiona Hill and her testimony. She made it a point in her opening statement, a couple of paragraphs in, to say, your Ukrainian conspiracy theories are garbage. I study this stuff for a living. It was Russia, it was Russia, it was Russia.
And what happened?
We just saw it.
Yeah, that's what happened. So, Susan Page, I don't know about you, but I sit here nearly every day baffled, really baffled, in wonderment at how so many people who you would expect more of, like Senator Kennedy, who we just saw, seem to sell their souls to a lie, to a myth, to a conspiracy, to the President of the United States, Donald Trump, handcuffed themselves to him in history and in reality, to today and tomorrow, forever. They're going to be handcuffed to him for what they say. I no longer know what is going on in Washington, D.C. You're there each and every day. I understand you're charged with writing almost every day. But do you ever pause to wonder about the same things that I just mentioned? Am I alone here?
You know, when we try to figure out to make sense of things, to make sense of this story, and we look for historical examples that give us some framework to think about it, there really aren't any. You know, we talk about Watergate, which was in some ways a similar sort of impeachment proceeding. But the big difference, I think, between Watergate and today is the state of the parties, and particularly the way the opposition party, the Republicans, have not been jurors, they've been advocates. The one stunning thing about the whole process, the Mueller investigation followed by the House Intelligence Committee hearings, is the failure to move really a single Republican vote. Mitt Romney's been somewhat critical, but you still don't have a Republican standing up in the role that you saw Republicans stand up during the Watergate era. And, you know, you don't have to look just back to be alarmed by this. Look forward. Fiona Hill, like Robert Mueller before her, started out by saying what we ought to be looking at is the next election, not the last election, because the Russian interference that marked the last election is going on for the next election. Are we doing things effectively to avoid the same kind of situation that we faced last time as a democracy?
And Jeremy, I want to pick up on Susan's point there. It's not just that Fiona Hill tried to debunk these Ukrainian conspiracy theories. Someone else was talking about Russian election interference last week. Vladimir Putin. At an event in Moscow, he said that with the Americans focused on the Ukrainian meddling, like the pressure's off, that finally they're talking about someone else messing with their elections and not us. So that's my question to you, is piggybacking off what Susan just said. How damaging is this going forward? The next election, we're under a year away. What steps can the American people have any confidence that this government is taking steps to prevent the Russians from doing this again?
Well, what Fiona Hill warned against was that the Republicans who are echoing the Ukrainian, and let's not call it a conspiracy theory, let's call it what it is, a lie, the Ukrainian lie, those Republicans who are echoing it are doing the bidding of Russia, wittingly or unwittingly. They are playing into the hands of a Russian operation to undermine the 2020 election. And of course, the reason why the impeachment is so important, this impeachment process is so important, is because we are a year away from an election, and what Trump was fundamentally trying to do was rig the 2020 election. That's why those who say, well, let's just censure him, there's no purpose in impeachment. No, the election is coming, and the president was trying to undermine it. And he's doing it, again, in concert with the benefit of the Russian intelligence services. And so we've seen this movie before, and we know how it ends. It will benefit Donald Trump, and that's precisely why he and his allies are doing this.
And now we have Senator Lindsey Graham opening his own investigation into Joe Biden and Ukraine.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.